Tonight, we look back at the life of Britain's longest-serving Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott, who died today aged 86. Tributes from across the political divide for the working-class lad who became Tony Blair's number 2, never pulled his punches. We examine the legacy he left for today's Labour Party. Russia's ambassador tells Sky News that the UK is now directly involved in the war in Ukraine following the use of UK-supplied missiles against Russia. But the Prime Minister says he'll back Kyiv for as long as it's needed. We'll hear the views of the former Security Minister Tom Tugendhat on that, plus the role of China, war crime charges against the Israeli Prime Minister, and whether he turned down a job from Kemi Badenoch. Also tonight, the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock tells the COVID inquiry that government guidance on funerals during the pandemic was wrong and that the country came within hours of running out of protective equipment. Plus, the former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries tells me about her experience of being abused by a Church of England vicar when she was just 9, saying it ruined her life. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. John Prescott, a titan of the Labour movement, has died aged 86 years old. Tony Blair's Deputy Prime Minister was a huge part of the new Labour movement, but really he was an old Labour politician, a socialist, a street fighter, sometimes literally, a man whose politics were forged in the class struggle, a man unambiguously of the left. Born in Wales, he failed the 11+, left school at 16 and went straight into the Merchant Navy. And then he became the MP for Hull, a place he represented for 4 decades and is now really synonymous with him. And, listening to the tributes today, watching the footage, listening to people talk about this most old Labour of new Labour politicians, it feels quite nostalgic, actually. For a Labour Party that's changed so much that paradoxically feels so alien from the Labour Party of John Prescott. And yet at the same time, he, of course, was instrumental in making that change happen. So a paradox of a politician with such an important role in his party's history. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, has been taking a look at his life and career.
Pride in our record, what we promised, we delivered. Pride in the future and what we promise to do next.
A titan, a colossus and a legend, just some of the tributes to John Prescott, a politician who pulled no punches. He was the link between Tony Blair's new Labour project and the party's more traditional roots. He saw himself as a man of the people. And yet he was known as Two Jags because he owned one as well as using a ministerial car.
A man who fought for working class ambition because he lived it. As one of the key architects of a Labour government, John achieved that rare thing. He changed people's lives.
King Charles praised Mr. Prescott's unique and indomitable character and infectious sense of humour. MP for Hull East for 40 years, Mr. Prescott stood for Labour leader in 1994, but after losing to Mr. Blair, he became his deputy. And after Labour's 1997 election victory, he became Deputy Prime Minister. But despite his achievements, he was often ridiculed for his unorthodox use of language.
When the Deputy Prime Minister said of local government last week, if you want to have a unitary, then you can have a ballot, discuss it with the people, but if you want it, fine. What exactly did he mean?
I think it's very, very clear, and I'm just surprised the Right Honourable Gentleman can't follow it.
People used to make fun of his speeches and his use of the English language, but he was an incredibly direct communicator. And even if the syntax never quite made sense, the sentiment was very powerful and made complete sense.
He was direct with journalists in Downing Street. And he once likened Peter Mandelson to a crab. During the 2001 election campaign, he punched a man who threw an egg at him. Mr. Blair reacted by saying simply, "John is John." When Mr. Blair left Downing Street in 2007, Mr. Prescott quit too.
John Lennon talked about working class heroes, and it's a very difficult term to understand and follow and to be one. But I think John comes nearest to it, and I think he would like that to be his epitaph. He was a titan, he was a colossus, but he was also a working class hero.
He left the Commons in 2010 and became a life peer. His last appearance in the House of Lords was in 2022.
People talk about the Red Wall. John Prescott was the Red Wall. You know, as Tony swept the south, John Prescott held on to the north and gave people confidence.
Married to wife Pauline for more than 60 years, John Prescott was Britain's longest-serving Deputy Prime Minister.
I don't think I could ever fill John's shoes, but I'm hoping that I continue to make him proud, which is what his last words to me were.
He'll be remembered as a firebrand and a political bruiser. He was a one-off. John Craig, Sky News.
Well, let's talk now to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who is here with us now. Sam, I kind of loved that tribute from Gordon Brown, saying that, you know, he was a titan, he was a colossus, but really he would love to be remembered as a working-class hero. It's interesting, isn't it, seeing how he would perhaps fit into kind of modern, sort of new look Keir Starmer party. It's a very specific role, that deputy leader, isn't it?
It is. After the news of John Prescott's death, I was reading some of the bits about John Prescott in the many, many books I've got about the New Labour era. And really, the best chronicler of that time was Andrew Rawnsley, and he described John Prescott as Hull's mushy peas to Islington's guacamole, the former being Prescott, the latter being Blair. And that blend, I think, Tony Blair certainly reflected today, was absolutely critical to the landslide victories that New Labour had under their partnership. But what's interesting is what it tells us about today, the similarities and the differences, because John Prescott was the longest-serving Deputy Prime Minister this country has ever had. And clearly there's something of a model in how Angela Rayner is now Deputy Prime Minister as well as Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, a bit of a yin to North London Keir Starmer's yang as well, designed to help the party reach to lots of different places. But I just wonder whether in the Labour Party, Angela Rayner really does do the same thing as John Prescott did. A couple of things I think are maybe different. There is no doubt that the thing the Labour Party loved about John Prescott was his loyalty to Tony Blair. Labour loves loyalty, and I think there's no doubt that even though there were rows in private, and the key role that John Prescott played was to bring Gordon Brown and Tony Blair together at sort of difficult times. But there's also questions like who Angela Rayner represents, whether she represents a new working class or whether she represents something different and actually does help the Labour vote in quite the way that John Prescott did. I was very struck by Tony Blair's written tribute to John Prescott this morning. He was saying that John Prescott was intolerant of overly liberal middle classes. He said he was a liberal and tolerant guy, yet instantly intolerant of people that were overly liberal. And there is a sense that, you know, John Prescott represented a certain type of working class view. But the question is that, has Angela Rayner's approach to, for instance, cultural issues, issues of woke, issues of society, are they similar? Do they perform a similar role to how John Prescott spoke to a certain slice of the demographic, or different? And I think there was almost a warning in what Tony Blair was saying, not to let effectively the Labour Party of today become too reflexive of liberal middle-class views. And the question is, does Angela Rayner lean into that in a way that's helpful or not?
Sam, thank you very much indeed, Sam Coates there. He was, as everyone's been saying, you know, such a title of the movement, someone who has such a legacy. It's so familiar as well. I just, you know, the footage that we've seen of him and the clips that have been playing throughout the day as well, really almost nostalgic. Sam, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have more on John Prescott as the programme goes on. And of course, his death and his life sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the Telegraph's deputy comment editor Annabelle Denham. To the war in Ukraine now, and Vladimir Putin tonight confirmed that Russia has fired a new medium-range missile against Ukraine in retaliation for the use of US and UK-supplied missiles on Russian territory. Now, earlier, Moscow's ambassador to the UK told Sky's Mark Austin that Britain is now directly involved in the war in Ukraine.
So are you saying now that Britain is directly involved in this war?
Absolutely. Britain and UK is now directly involved in this war because this fighting cannot happen without without NATO staff, British staff as well.
But you are using Chinese dual-use technology. You're using Iranian missiles. You're using Iranian drones. You're using North Korean troops. So are you saying all those countries are now directly involved too?
You do not allow me to answer. It is,
I'm just saying it can't work both ways, really.
How it works both ways. No, on that subject, I can say easily that we have plenty of mercenaries from different countries that are fighting right now on the side of Ukraine. We just have seen in Kursk area the Polish unit, which has a special uniform worn by Polish soldiers. So what's the matter?
Well, the Prime Minister has still not officially confirmed the use of those Storm Shadow missiles against Russia. But tonight, Downing Street said we're not going to be deterred or distracted by commentary from Vladimir Putin or the Russian ambassador. Let's hear what Keir Starmer said to MPs earlier about the UK's support for Ukraine.
The UK's support for Ukraine is always for self-defence. It is proportionate, coordinated and agile, and a response to Russia's own actions. And it is in accordance with international law. Under Article 51 of the UN Charter, Ukraine has a clear right of self-defence against Russia's illegal attacks. So, Mr. Speaker, I say again, Russia could roll back their forces and end this war tomorrow. But until then, we will stand up for what we know is right, for Ukraine's security and for our own security. And we will back Ukraine with what is needed for as long as it's needed.
Well, it comes as the Defence Secretary said that in recent weeks there has been an escalation from Putin and his forces. John Healey faced questions from the Defence Select Committee a day on from announcing a series of what he called money-saving military cuts.
This is a serious moment that I come before the committee. Defence intelligence will reveal today that the front line is now less stable than at any time since the early days of the full-scale Russian invasion in February 22. And we've seen in recent weeks a very clear escalation from Putin and his forces.
Well, meanwhile, in the Middle East, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his former Defence Secretary and the leader of Hamas. They've been accused of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity during the war in Gaza. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister's office said the warrant against him was anti-Semitic. Hamas leader al-Masri was the mastermind behind the 7th of October attacks, although, of course, he might no longer be alive. Israel claimed to have killed him in an airstrike earlier this year. So another day of significant international development. A good day to speak to the former Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, who, of course, was one of the main contenders to be leader of the Conservative Party. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. So much to discuss on the international stage. Of course, this week, Ukraine fired into Russia for the first time using UK-supplied missiles. And today, the Russian ambassador has told Sky News that Britain is now directly involved in the war. I mean, are we directly involved?
Look, Russia has been trying to extend this war for years. Don't forget, only a few years ago, they threatened a nuclear strike on Denmark, of all countries. This is not the first time Russia does this. It does it the whole time. It's what bullies do when they try and get out of the mess they've caused themselves, and that's what Putin's doing now. I'm afraid I don't listen to the Russian ambassador anymore. He just lies the whole time, and it's completely irrelevant what he says anyway, because he's not listened to in Moscow, and he's completely irrelevant in the United Kingdom. So what we've got to focus on is how do we keep Ukrainians safe? How do we make sure Russia's evil aggression doesn't continue any further? And that's why I think it is perfectly reasonable for Ukraine to use the weapons that it has at its disposal to strike those areas from which it is itself being struck. Why should Russia be able to mount attacks on Ukraine in safety when the women and children and innocent civilians of Ukraine are being murdered in these attacks. Of course, Ukraine should have the right to strike back. Of course, the Ukrainians are right to have the capability to respond.
So you're comfortable then with the use of these UK-supplied missiles? You think it's the right thing to do? And what do you think it should have happened sooner, I guess?
Look, I think it should have happened sooner. I think that the Ukrainians should have the capability to defend themselves. I think it's deeply immoral that a country like Russia is able to assemble the weaponry, the artillery, the ammunition, the people to attack Ukraine. And Ukraine can only strike back when they've entered Ukrainian territory. Why is that right? It isn't, and they should be able to defend themselves.
Are you concerned about what a Donald Trump presidency means for the war, and by extension, what you're just talking there about Western democracy? Because, you know, he said in the campaign, didn't he, that he could end the war in 24 hours. Lots of people say, or effectively believe, that what that means is appeasing Russia, giving in some of their demands, forcing Ukraine to make a compromise.
Well, Sophie, we were in a similar position about 8 years ago, and the trouble we have with Donald Trump is I don't know, and nobody does. Nobody can quite predict what's going to happen. I think it's possible that you're right. It's possible that it's concerning. It's also possible that what he seeks to do is return the position to where it was when he left office in 2020. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know which one of those he's going to do. I am reassured by the fact that he's nominated Marco Rubio, Florida senator, to be the Secretary of State. He's always demonstrated a capability to stand up against dictatorships, whether in China or Russia. I'm reassured that he's appointed Mike Waltz, or nominated Mike Waltz, to be his national security advisor. He's a great Florida congressman and has been a really impressive champion of standing up for democracy. So, you know, I'm reassured by those two names. We'll have to see what happens. But, you know, we really can't simply leave this to the United States. It simply cannot be right that the defence of Europe is based on the opinion of a few people so far away. It needs to be based on our own capabilities, our own spending, our own preparations. And as I said before, Russia is already conducting operations against us here in Europe. They're already setting fire to factories, to sites here in the UK and around Europe. They're already trying to murder people here.
Talking about the defence capability that you mentioned there and defence spending, we of course saw John Healey, the Defence Secretary, set out £500 million worth of savings, cuts, I guess, depending on your perspective. Some people say this is absolutely the wrong thing to do, the wrong message to send, given the global threats we face. Others say, look, this is retiring a bit of outdated kit, freeing a bit of headspace up elsewhere. What's your own view on that?
Well, he saved £9 million by getting rid of Albion, which is one of the LPDs, the landing craft carriers. Now, you know, that's a hell of a saving. Mm. You cannot launch an amphibious landing without them.
So what do you mean? Just explain to me.
Well, that means that you can't launch a Command Overall Marines onto a beach without these ships.
So it was a mistake, you think, then?
Well, you're really removing a capability from defence. I think the biggest mistake, frankly, is that, and, you know, I own part of this myself, is that over the last 10 years, those of us in Parliament have not made the case successfully enough for the investment in defence that we need to see. Now, I've been calling for 3%, as you know, for the last, whatever it is now, 4 or 5 years.
So it's on the Conservatives as well? You think it was on the last administration too?
I'm not trying to make a partisan point here, Sophie. Frankly, we have needed to spend more on defence for a very long time. I've been calling for it for 3 or 4 years. I was calling for it in government as well. I didn't, as you can tell, I didn't win, right? I mean, you know, I didn't win the argument, but it's only becoming more important. You know, I was just in Estonia, and they are incredibly grateful, incredibly proud to have a British brigade there in Tapa alongside them and ready to defend, ready to stand up against Russian aggression. But let's not pretend that one brigade is enough. What we're seeing in Russia is quite literally hundreds of brigades on each side. We're seeing brigades fighting on the Ukrainian side being effectively knocked out of action within weeks or months. It doesn't mean everybody in them has been killed, but effectively the entity has been so knocked back that it needs to be reformed and then brought back into the fight. We're seeing a huge amount of need for manpower. and yet at the same time we're cutting back.
You have spoken a lot about the threat from China as well over the years, and of course we've seen recently Keir Starmer make the decision to meet with the Chinese president, first time I think a UK Prime Minister has done so in 6 years. Look, he says he needs a pragmatic relationship with China. Do you buy that argument that, look, they're an important trading partner, they're an important player on the global stage, we need to be pragmatic about it?
Look, I agree that we need to have a relationship with China. The question is, at what level and how do you have that relationship? Do you do, as Keir Starmer just did in Rio at the G20, do you have a meeting where you allow the Chinese dictator to kick out the journalists during the element when it's supposed to be on the record? Is that what you allow? Do you tolerate that sort of behaviour? Or do you stand up for your values and say, no, we believe in freedom of speech, and we believe in journalistic challenge, even when sometimes it's not very pleasant? Is that what we stand up for, or don't we? And what's needed is the defence of British values and the defence of the British people.
You were alarmed by this boat interception as well. That's right, isn't it?
That's right. Well, this is the Danish Navy, according to reports, has intercepted a Chinese vessel crewed by a Russian captain and possibly also a Russian crew that is accused of having cut cables, undersea cables that connect us, the internet traffic and all the sort of cables that connect this world together. And it's worth remembering that China isn't just another country. It's a fundamental partner in Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, a fundamental partner in Russia's aim at destabilising the West.
And they say they're neutral in this, right?
It's complete rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. You know, for a country that champions its own sovereignty and always says that, you know, you mustn't have foreign interference, this is a country that continuously interferes in the lives of others abroad, not just in Ukraine, but actually here in the United Kingdom. We know of Hong Kongers, British nationals, here in the United Kingdom, whose lives have been made a misery by Chinese state agents who've hassled them here in the United Kingdom. It's got to stop.
We've explored a huge amount in foreign affairs and the international situation. I think we could talk about it for a long time. There is one other thing that I did want to get your view on as well, because we've heard today that the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for the leader of Hamas, but also for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you agree with that arrest warrant?
I think what the International Criminal Court is trying to do is to sound balanced. But it's complete rubbish that there is a balance. One is a terrorist organisation that's specific charter, its actual constitution, says that its purpose is to kill every Jew. That's its purpose. The other is the democratically elected head of a state. Now, you may not like his policies. There's plenty that I can criticise about his policies. But the idea that there is an equality is complete rubbish.
Some say that he's committed war crimes, right? Well, that's what it's about, isn't it?
Israel is the only state in the Middle East where the head of state has gone to prison because of a judgment found by their own high court. It so happens that the high court, the president of that high court, was an Arab judge sitting over a Jewish president. You know, this is a state that has its own legal office investigating these matters and consistently, you know, has on regular occasions found Israeli politicians guilty of various different crimes and sent them to prison. If the Israeli courts feel that is appropriate, they can proceed with those crimes. The difference is with Hamas, its specific purpose is the murder of Jews.
You've got an awful lot to say on foreign affairs. It's very clear. Just to finish, did you decline to serve in Kemi Badenoch's shadow cabinet? What went on there?
Well, Kemi's a really, really good friend. She has been for many years. She very kindly asked me if I was looking for a role, and I said, look, if you wouldn't mind very much, I'd like to have a little bit of time to think and to do a few other things and come back to serve in due course. She's already started extremely well. She's going to make a great leader of the opposition. She's already started on that journey. And in about 4.5 years' time, she's going to make a great Prime Minister.
OK, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, we report on the case The Fake Carer that shows how vulnerable people are being failed by the home care industry.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Lough Neagh. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, let's move away from international affairs now. And one of the main pillars of the government's plan to reform the NHS is a drive to get more people treated at home or in the community. But what happens when that care falls dangerously short? Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has uncovered the bizarre story of a fake carer sent to look after a vulnerable older patient. His report has exposed some deep concerns about the state of Britain's home care industry.
Sarah Whittaker hired a live-in carer for her 89-year-old father, David, who needs some help at home. But it was the beginning of a mystery that's left the family shocked and angry.
This was somebody with experience and qualifications in personal, intimate care.
The carer came with a glowing CV, years of experience. But the care wasn't up to scratch.
We had to teach her how to open and close the catheter and empty it. She'd never seen one before. She was just giving you pills here, there and everywhere, wasn't she?
Well, she just wasn't trained.
On a family walk one day, David's granddaughter takes a video. The carer, who we aren't identifying, looks panicked to be on camera and quickly ducks out of view.
And that's when we picked up the video and compared it to their photograph of her, and we realised it wasn't the same woman. And the next morning she just packed her bag and left. Who was she? And why was she hiding in our house?
Sarah and her family had been duped. The carer who should have done the job sent an untrained imposter in her place. The police were called, but to the family's disappointment, they said they would not investigate as they had limited lines of inquiry. So we tracked the real carer down.
I was there. I did the job. They don't believe and they don't want to know.
I have a photograph of that person.
And that was not me. That's what you think.
So how do I explain that?
It's so bad. Very bad, and I'm so sorry. Because something I've never done in my life. Because when it comes to care, I give it all.
The case of the fake carer exposes flaws in the home care system. The type of agency Sarah used to hire Tracy, so-called introductory care, isn't regulated by the Care Quality Commission, which is set up to protect people from coming to harm. David is clear. He thinks all home care agencies should be regulated.
There's no point in being responsible for the care industry if you only deal with people who are registered with you. It's quite pointless. I feel very cross about it.
Access Care, who supplied Tracy, said, "We were shocked to hear of this terrible deception and are deeply sorry for what Mr. Seal and his family have experienced. When we heard of these alarming allegations, we contacted Action Fraud and the police and commenced an urgent safeguarding review. We have strict protocols in place. However, these extremely unusual circumstances have given us cause for reflection. We are in the process of developing further security checks and procedures for families in receipt of care at home." The government says it wants to relieve pressure on the NHS by encouraging more people to be cared for at home in the community.
You've got to know who's coming into your house. And I think the introductory agency system is clearly very flawed. If the system can be played this easily, the system needs to change and be more secure.
Following our investigation, Hampshire Police now say they are pursuing lines of inquiry. Nick Martin, Sky News.
Well, a Department of Health and Social Care spokesperson said our sympathies are with David's family and friends in this deeply concerning case. A healthy NHS and social care system requires strong regulation to ensure patient and user safety, and that's why we're reforming the Care Quality Commission to make sure it is fit for purpose. You can also watch Nick's full report on the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee at 8 o'clock this evening, or scan the QR code on your screen now. Now, Matt Hancock, who led the country's health service throughout the pandemic, of course, has admitted the government got it wrong with restrictions around funerals and visiting dying relatives. Speaking at the COVID inquiry, he also said that at one point, the NHS was just hours away from running out of PPE. But he did maintain that the NHS was not overwhelmed during the crisis.
Mr Hancock, from your perspective, did England ever run out of PPE for the NHS?
As a whole, no, but individual locations did.
All right, so you accept that we came close?
We came extremely close. We came within, small numbers of items on a regular basis during April and May 2020. And what we effectively did do was ensure that there was always overall PPE supply, but it got extremely close, sometimes within hours. And for the people operating that PPE supply chain on the ground, it was incredibly difficult.
Matt Hancock speaking there at the COVID inquiry. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. The former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries tells me about her experience of being abused by a Church of England vicar when she was just 9 years old. My full interview with her is next. I've got a little bit of breaking news to bring you because detectives investigating the death of Harshita Brella are appealing to people in Corby for information and also camera footage, dash cam footage, that might help their inquiries. Now, Harshita Brella was found inside the boot of a vehicle in Ilford in East London in the early hours of Thursday, November the 14th. That is the image that Northants Police have released as they try and get more information from anyone who may have any information or any footage that might help their inquiries. Harshita Brella found in the boot of a car. They believe her body may have been transported from Corby to East London in that car, which was then left parked in Ilford. They are also searching, it should be said, to Pankaj Lamba, who they want to talk to in connection with her death. That's her 23-year-old husband. So that image there released by Northants Police, who are asking for more information as they investigate the death of Harshita Brella. Back to the politics, because Nadine Dorries is not someone who has ever shied away from controversy as a politician. She's written a new book about the downfall of the Conservative Party, which doesn't flinch from apportioning blame to senior Conservatives, with the exception, of course, of her former boss, Boris Johnson. I spoke to her about that, of course. But before the interview, I asked if she would be comfortable talking to me about something else. She was abused when she was 9 years old by a Church of England vicar. Now, she wasn't comfortable talking about it. She would have probably preferred to talk about anything else in the world, but she did decide to speak to me about it despite that, because she's angry, she's furious even, about what she sees as the architecture of suppression in the church that is still shutting down victims of abuse. It was an intense interview. It made a big impression on me. I want to play you it now, a warning that it does involve discussion of child abuse. Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to have you here. So you've written a new book, Downfall. It's subtitled The Self-Destruction of the Conservative Party. So do you think the Conservative Party is destroyed?
Well, you know, political parties too die. They have no God-given right to exist. And the Conservative Party MPs in particular have inflicted some pretty fatal wounds upon itself in recent years. Does it deserve to die? I hope not, because I am a Conservative. Is it terminal? Is it actually terminal? I don't think we know yet, and it's not possible to tell at this moment in time, but it's in a pretty bad place. And there are a number of kind of factors that play into that. One is, of course, that you now have reform. You have MPs in Westminster, and you have Nigel Farage, who is filling the political stage. And I do say the reason why he's filling it is because Boris Johnson has exited that stage, and reform are a very serious threat now.
So do you think Nigel Farage is like the new Boris Johnson then?
No, not at all. You know, I always say that one of the reasons why Boris Johnson got an 80-seat majority was because he literally straddled the policy spectrum. He had net zero, he had levelling up at the same time as he had Brexit and other policies, and HS2 and other visionary infrastructure type policies. So that's the reason why he did so well, because he spoke to lots of voter groups and people across the social divide as well, whereas reform is right of centre and very narrow in its policies.
I'm interested to get your thoughts on the new leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch. What do you make of her? Do you think she would be a good leader of the party?
Who knows, we'll wait and see. But I think Kemi has to do a number of things in order to be a good leader of the Conservative Party, because we know what's been wrong, from candidate selection to the Whip's office having numerous complaints about MPs and just covering them up when they should no longer have been allowed to stand as MPs, to the game playing and the plotting that happens in the background. And I hope that what Kemi will do moving forward is she will completely cut herself adrift from people like Dominic Cummings and Dougie Smith and Michael Gove and others. She will cut herself adrift from those people, even though they are the people who've supported her and got her to where she is today, and will take the party in a new direction. And I'm hoping that she does that, and I'm kind of crossing my fingers and waiting to see that happen. But, you know, as of today, Dougie Smith, who actually was written about in this Sunday Times, even though people said he was a figment of my imagination a year ago, is still responsible for the Candidates Department, is still paid by CCHQ, and is still there. I'm looking forward to the day when I can say, Kemi's going to make a difference because she's going to cut herself away from all of that. I'd like to see that happen.
There is one other thing that I did want to speak to you about. And before I do, I just want to say that I really appreciate you talking to me about this, because I can imagine it must be very, very difficult. And I think you are incredibly strong and resilient for choosing to do so. Sexual abuse within the Church of England has been in the news recently. We've seen, of course, the Archbishop of Canterbury resign for his handling of a case. And you have written recently about your own experiences of this when you were 9, just a little girl. You obviously don't have to go into the details of what happened, but you were abused when you were younger.
I was, yeah. And I don't like talking about it. I don't even like writing about it. But I was made so angry by the recent reports of the abuse those young boys received that and I mean so angry, that the church is still covering up, it's still facilitating that degree of abuse. And, you know, the church is an institution where things happen that shouldn't, as I've written about in Downfall, as is the Conservative Party, as is the Post Office, as is various other institutions where toxic cultures develop. And what makes me really angry is when those cultures are allowed to continue despite the fact that people know about them. And what really angered me about Justin Welby is when I read that that people knew that this wasn't one person, this was many people, and a really serious level of abuse inflicted on those children, on those young boys who were children. It made me blisteringly angry. And I was a cathartic process. I wrote my 3 books through this. And it was actually a journalist who picked up and challenged me about my denials, and that's how it came out into the open. It wasn't that I willingly put it out there. A journalist kind of put 2 and 2 together.
So you fictionalised it, is what
I
you
did.
mean, and then someone said, this has got to be more than fiction to you, this is more personal.
So journalist Amy Oliver said to me, she was reviewing the book and interestingly read it and said, you've put this person's name in your 3rd book, and I don't think your descriptions of abuse are fictional, and I know you've denied it as being real, but it is, isn't it? And I couldn't lie to her, it was. And so she went on this journey of finding out where he was and told me he was dead. And I didn't follow it through. I was called for a meeting with 3 bishops in the House of Lords who sat 12 foot away from me as though I was contagious, who promised me they would go away. I can still see the face on them and say, we're going to look into this. This is quite a serious complaint. We're going to look into this and we will get back to you. I heard nothing back.
So they said they'd get back to you?
Nothing.
And they didn't
Stonewalled me. Yeah, stonewalled.
I found that extraordinary.
Yeah. But what I've realised over this story, these young boys, is that there's almost an architecture of suppression and shutting things down. And I realised only recently when I heard about these young boys, it's about money. It's not money. They are afraid that people will come through and make claims of compensation against the church, and they're just about protecting the coffers. And
is there a particular problem, and I know you speak about other institutions as well and institutional responsibility, but do you think there is a particular problem with the church?
Yeah, I do, because it's been well known and it's widespread. And would Justin Welby have become Archbishop if he'd addressed this problem early on in his career? If when he was told about those young boys, he'd done something? If he put a process in place to deal with complaints?
I need to put his side at this point over, which is Justin Welby says that he thought that the process was going on, that the police knew about it, and he believed that that process would continue. That's what he says.
Yeah, I think he has a responsibility in the church, not to think that was happening, but to know that was happening. And he didn't know, he only thought. And that shows a lack of responsibility, a lack of taking the issue seriously, a lack of due diligence on behalf of the church to ensure there are processes in place to follow those complaints through. It fails on every level. He failed on every level.
You said that you had lived with the shame about what happened and that now you're angry, and I can sense that anger. I find it kind of heartbreaking that you have carried this shame, and I know that obviously, we're talking about their little boys, who's been, many of them now men, of course, who have shared their story, and I'm sure the tragedy is that many of them will feel shame as well.
Yeah, it ruins your life. It literally ruins your life.
Is that what you feel? You feel it's ruined your life? I
feel it's ruined my life, and I think the big sadness for me is that I never discussed it with my husband. Never. And he's gone now, and I can't discuss it with him. And I think that's the biggest sadness for me. And it's... And I still don't discuss it with my children, my daughters, who are grown women now. They know about it. And the youngest, says to me, Mum, she said to me about when I spoke to her about these young boys, she said, you need to write more about you, you need to talk about more about you. And I said, I can't, I don't like doing it. And she said, it's nothing to be ashamed of. The middle one tells me I need therapy. This one tells me I need to write about it more. So yeah, so the girls do know, but I don't discuss it. I've never discussed what happened to me, but it does. It changes you forever. And, I am 67 next birthday. No, I'm 67 now, aren't I? I'm 68 next birthday. I wish I wasn't, but I am. And it has taken me all of this time to get to a point to think, can I stop feeling the shame? Can I stop feeling less of an individual? Can I stop feeling lesser than everybody else because of what happened to me that didn't happen to them? And one of the reasons why I think I can do that is because it happened to so many others as well.
Yeah, and they shouldn't feel shame. They shouldn't feel shame either.
No.
And actually, that's why I thank you so much for... I can sense how you don't want to talk about this, and I get that totally. But the fact that you have spoken about it, I think will really help people, so I really appreciate you doing it. Thank you.
No, thanks, Sophie.
Nadine Dorries there, speaking about her experience, aged 9 years old, how it's still impacting her, of course, to this day. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Our very own John Craig will talk to us about the colourful life and times of John Prescott. He's died aged 86.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. It takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello. No, yes, where is it? I said, I found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it, let me see it. This is brilliant, brilliant.
This may be the Premier League.
I'm not like everybody else.
But this duo have been in a league of their own. It's Haaland, a striker like no other.
Like everybody else.
Son, Starman for Tottenham Hotspur.
Like everybody else.
City, Tottenham on NBC and Peacock.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, it's been a day of tributes to the life of Britain's longest-serving Deputy Prime Minister, Lord Prescott. He's died at the age of 86. Now, while many, of course, remember the famous punch in the 2001 election campaign, he was equally punchy at the dispatch box. Here he was, standing in at Prime Minister's questions, responding to a jibe from the then Deputy Conservative leader, William Hague.
Compared to the last 5 years of which he had some influence, where there was an actual reduction of 7% in real terms of contribution to the councils for their council tax.
Hey. I think there was so little English in that answer, President Chirac would have been happy with it. The fact is...
I may get the grammar wrong, that's true, and I'll have to take the blame for that. That was my education, I'm responsible for it. But you know, I'd sooner get perhaps the words wrong than getting my judgment wrong. After all, he was the leader who slammed the England independence. He was the leader who claimed that the minimum wage was the height of irresponsibility and would cause unemployment. And he was the leader who said that Lord Archer was a man of integrity. Now, if there's a choice between getting my words wrong or getting the judgment wrong, I'd sooner have my problem, not his. And can I just say to the honourable member, since he mentioned President Chirac, has he still said that he believes that those who describe the French as cheese-eating surrender monkeys, does he believe that? Because if he does, it makes him look me a master of diplomacy.
Oh, it's just so good. It makes me very nostalgic. And we're joined, of course, by our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who's been reflecting on John Prescott's life and career. He joins us now. John, you got your cuttings book, which I'm quite excited about.
That was vintage Prescott, wasn't it? Absolute vintage.
It was amazing.
I mean, his speeches on the last day of the Labour Party conference were pure Les Dawson, I used to think, the way he told the jokes. Although the comedian Roy Hudd, who wrote jokes for the Labour Party, reckoned that Prescott was better at telling jokes than Tony Blair. But that was, in the House, he was just fantastic. I mean, there's that famous quote, isn't there? I don't know whether it's apocryphal. The Green Belt is a Labour achievement and we intend to build on it.
It's honestly...
a famous Prescott quote.
Honestly, it does. It's vintage PMQs, like you said. It doesn't get better than that.
And the reason I mentioned the party conference is because in those days, years ago, the Labour conference went on till Friday. They all finish on a Wednesday these days, don't they? And one of my... I mean, I had so many clashes and run-ins with John Prescott over the years. The most spectacular was the Labour conference of 1995. That was actually the year that Alistair Campbell was accused of bullying the BBC, telling them to lead on Tony Blair's speech and not the O.J. Simpson trial. But anyway, I wrote a story which was a splash. I was political editor of the Daily Express, and we used to sell a lot of copies then. And the headline is Prescott Fury at New Snub. And there it is.
Here we go.
Yeah, and I've got it here in my cutting
John
book.
Craig.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And the intro says, John Prescott was spitting blood last night at another humiliating snub by Tony Blair and his inner circle. Don't we love that tabloid writing? You were on the news of the world. You were on the news of the world.
Tabloid work.
Yeah. The Labour deputy was said to be furious that Mr Blair's friend Peter Mandelson will appear in a major end-of-conference BBC interview instead of him. So Prescott then got a pork pie, and in his speech went lies, lies, porky pies. Got a little photo there. I've written about this on the Sky News website, by the way. He tried to present me with a pork pie. Came into the press room with a... First of all, he wanted me to go on the stage. Wouldn't do that. Then he came into the press room with a Sky News crew, our then colleague Richard Bestick, and a Newsnight crew. And then the next day, I did a piece that the headline in the Express was a great... I don't know if we can see that, but John Prescott's face in the middle of a pork pie. That's pie in the sky, John. Anyway, we had lots...
to give you a pork pie. Did you eat it?
No, I took it back to the office and presented it to the editor, a rather bemused Sir Nicholas Lloyd. We never did eat it because, of course, the pie was legendary, just like John Prescott. But, I mean, he could be irascible, bad-tempered. I remember you'd ring him, he'd be driving one of his Jags, and he'd answer on his car phone. And he'd, oh, hold on, there's a police car there.
Oh my goodness.
And then
Don't do that at home, guys.
after a rant about the paper, he'd say, right, what do you want to know? So he was, as you know, in the old days we used to say, great copy. But I have to say, my most recent clash was when he stood for Humberside Police Commissioner, and when, of course, he lost to a Conservative. And I said, "You're going to retire, John? Retire? Retire?" He got very angry about that. But the last time I saw him, I wouldn't say we kissed and made up, but he was charming to me. Yeah. He said, "You always tell it like it is, John." I said, "Gosh, John, you never used to say that." Anyway, we parted on very good terms. He was very friendly last time I saw him.
There you go. And thank you.
No grudges, unlike some politicians.
Well, yeah, you can't say fairer than that, to be honest. Played the game. Thank you very much, John. And as John was saying, you know, one of the big characters of politics for this generation, really, someone who has left such a huge imprint on the Labour Party as well. That's it from us this evening. I'll see you on Monday at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, and then The World with Gillian Joseph. But I'll see you on Monday.